When someone you care about suddenly goes silent, it can feel like 1,000 questions rise up at once. Confusion, doubt, hurt, even anger. But here's the truth that most people avoid because it's uncomfortable. Silence is never just silence. It's not a placeholder. It's not a mistake. It's a message, and how you choose to interpret that message determines how you rise or how you collapse. Silence is a language all its own, and those who learn to understand it no longer fall apart when someone withdraws. They grow, they evolve. When he goes silent, you have to resist the urge to chase noise. The human mind wants answers, it craves closure, but maturity, real emotional maturity, means realizing that not all questions will get answered. Not every gap will be filled with words. Some absences are intentional. Some silences are chosen. You may think maybe he was busy, maybe he didn't know what to say, maybe he's confused, and maybe he is. But even confusion is a choice when it leads to inaction. Silence in the context of human relationships is not an empty void. It's a declaration without punctuation. It says, I'm not ready, or I don't care enough to respond, or you're not a priority right now. And if you're honest with yourself, you already know what the silence meant. You felt it. But instead of accepting what the silence communicates, many people make the mistake of filling in the blanks with fantasy. They invent reasons, they excuse it, they hope that the return of a text, a call, or a sudden "Hey, how have you been?" is proof that the silence meant nothing. They want the silence to have been a glitch in the system instead of a sign of disconnection. But this is dangerous. It weakens your power. It makes you emotionally dependent on an apology that may never come or a reason that might not even exist. Understanding silence means understanding that someone's lack of words is sometimes the loudest answer you'll ever get. It tells you where you stand. It reveals their level of effort, their character, and their ability to face discomfort. Because real connection doesn't hide. Real love doesn't evaporate into nothing. Real intention doesn't ghost. When someone goes silent, they are choosing not to engage with your presence. They are opting out, and when they return, you must remember that. Don't rush to respond because you missed them. Don't jump to reply because the silence was unbearable. You must take that moment and remember, if someone can comfortably disappear without explanation, they showed you a version of themselves that words can't soften. Silence strips away charm. It peels off the mask. It shows you the reality beneath the attraction. It teaches you whether they can stand beside you in discomfort, or whether they flee when things get too real. Let's not romanticize silence. Let's not pretend it was something it wasn't. If someone cared deeply, they would have found a way. People don't ignore those they treasure. They don't go silent on hearts they respect. No one is too busy to send a few words to someone who truly matters. So, when he reaches out after silence, the question isn't, what should I say? The question is, what did the silence already say? Silence forces you to confront your attachment. It shows you how much you depend on validation from the outside. It reveals where your wounds are still bleeding. Most people are not afraid of the silence itself. They're afraid of what it says about them. They internalize the silence as rejection, as proof that they're not good enough, worthy enough, or interesting enough. But that's a lie the ego tells to protect itself. The silence wasn't about you. It was about them, their avoidance, their fears, their immaturity, their inability to hold space for a connection. And yet, in that stillness, you learn something powerful. You learn to stand without constant reassurance. You learn to become emotionally self-sufficient. You learn to seek truth over comfort. When someone goes silent, and you sit with your feelings instead of begging for noise, you gain a level of self-respect that can't be shaken. You begin to build an inner stability that doesn't collapse when someone else vanishes. The silence becomes your teacher. It teaches you not to beg for explanations. It teaches you to observe instead of react. It teaches you to listen to your intuition instead of your desperation. Most importantly, it teaches you that presence is a privilege, not a guarantee. When someone withholds their voice, don't rush to give them yours the moment they return. Instead, reflect, reconnect with yourself, reevaluate what you deserve, because when the silence ends, it's easy to fall back into the old rhythm. But if the silence hurt, if it left you doubting, then maybe that rhythm was always broken to begin with. When he returns, don't let his words override what his absence already taught you. When he finally reaches out after a period of silence, your first instinct may be to react. That emotional rush, the sudden heartbeat, the curiosity, the hurt resurfacing can push you toward impulsive decisions. You might feel an immediate need to reply, to demand answers, to express how much it hurt, or to pretend like everything is okay. But there's a significant difference between reacting and responding, and that difference is where your power lies. A reaction is automatic. It's raw. It comes from pain, from insecurity, from the ego crying out for validation. But a response is calculated. A response is mature. A response is controlled. And until you learn how to pause, reflect, and respond rather than react, you will continue giving away your power to people who don't know what to do with it. Reactions are triggered by emotional wounds. The silence triggered you because it touched an old story, one you may not even be fully aware of. Perhaps it reminded you of being ignored in childhood, or not being chosen, or not being enough. So when he breaks the silence and pops back into your life with a casual message or a friendly greeting, that wounded part of you leaps up and says, "Here's your chance to be seen again. Say something. Get closure. Prove your worth." But that's not your higher self speaking. That's the hurt child inside of you searching for relief. Reacting in that moment might look like over-explaining your feelings, pouring your heart out too soon, or acting like nothing happened just to keep the peace. It might look like pretending to be unaffected, when deep down you're aching for honesty and clarity, but none of those actions serve you. They serve your fear of loss, not your self-respect. That's why the pause, the moment between impulse and action, is where transformation begins. When you pause, even for a few minutes, you create room for choice. And in that space, you get to decide, who do I want to be in this moment? You're not obligated to respond on his schedule. Just because someone has decided to speak again doesn't mean you have to open the door with a smile. You have every right to sit with your emotions, to question your boundaries, to reflect on what the silence meant and what the reappearance really represents. Is he returning with clarity, with honesty, with purpose? Or is he simply bored, lonely, or looking to ease his own guilt? These are the questions that never get answered when you react emotionally. Because emotional reactions rarely lead to honest conversations, they usually lead to confusion, regret, or worse, self-betrayal. Responding, on the other hand, is about acting from your truth. It's about owning your emotions without letting them own you. It's about seeing the full picture, not just the moment of his return, but everything that came before it, the silence, the distance, the unanswered questions. A response might be silence in return. It might be a clear message that you've moved on. It might be an honest conversation, but one grounded in your strength, not your sadness. Responding means you've taken the time to sit with the discomfort, to observe your triggers, and to ask yourself, what do I need right now, and not what does he want from me? So many people walk through life reacting to everyone who touches their emotions. They are pulled in every direction by text messages, by old flames, by random apologies. They keep reliving the same cycles because they never stop to respond with intention. They never pause long enough to check in with their own soul. But if you want to stop being used, if you want to stop feeling lost when someone pulls away and comes back again, you must practice the art of response. You must learn to breathe in the moment of emotional heat. You must learn to separate the feeling from the action. Just because your emotions are valid doesn't mean your reaction is wise. Emotion says, I miss him. Wisdom says, let me understand why he left in the first place. Emotion says, say something so he doesn't disappear again. Wisdom says, if silence was easy for him, maybe he was never really invested. When you respond, you don't suppress the emotion, you elevate it. You take it through the filter of clarity, maturity, and truth. And that kind of response creates dignity, it creates peace, it creates space for genuine connection or for a graceful ending. The hardest part of responding instead of reacting is learning to delay gratification. You want relief, you want answers, you want the knot in your chest to disappear, but instant relief often leads to long-term pain. That's why the pause is sacred. It's not about playing games or being cold. It's about giving yourself permission to process. It's about saying, I matter enough to take my time. Because if someone can disappear without explanation, then reappear without accountability, and you allow that without reflection, then you teach your heart that inconsistency is love. And that is not the truth. In the end, how you respond will determine how the next chapter unfolds. Not just with him, but with yourself. Because your response is not about him, it's about the standard you set, the healing you've done, and the love you're finally giving to yourself instead of begging for from someone else. When someone who once went silent finally reaches out, there's a storm of thoughts that rush through your mind. What does he want? Why now? Is he sincere? Should I trust this? The mind begins to spin stories, assumptions, and hopeful theories to fill in the gaps left behind by his absence. But this is where the danger lies, when you allow imagination to replace evidence and emotions to overwrite reality. If you're not anchored in truth, you'll fall for gestures that mean nothing and words that carry no weight. That's why the return of someone who disappeared should not be judged by their words, but by their actions. Words are easy. Consistency is costly. People often come back not because they want to stay, but because they miss your energy. They miss the comfort of your presence, not the commitment of your partnership. There's a difference. Some return to test the waters, to see if the door is still open, to see if you're still available to validate them when the world goes quiet. That's why you must observe patterns, not promises. Anyone can say they missed you. Anyone can say they were confused, or dealing with things, or going through a lot. But real transformation shows up in changed behavior. It reveals itself in consistency, in presence, in effort over time. Not in late night messages or nostalgic conversations. When someone reappears after a season of silence, it's not enough for them to express remorse or curiosity. They must demonstrate growth. They must show that their silence taught them something, that it wasn't just a timeout for comfort or convenience. You cannot afford to build connection on temporary emotions. Temporary emotion can look a lot like love when it's dressed in regret and loneliness, but don't mistake a feeling for a foundation. The truth is, if someone truly values you, they'll show it not with a single message, but with repeated action. They'll be present without prompting. They'll offer consistency without pressure. They'll initiate instead of waiting for you to do the emotional labor. It's tempting to believe that someone has changed the moment they come back. You want to believe it. You miss the connection. You remember the good times. You long for the closeness you once had. And in that longing, you might overlook the evidence that nothing has really changed. But love without accountability is just a fantasy. If someone hurt you by disappearing, then healing cannot happen through words alone. They must acknowledge the silence, take responsibility for the impact, and prove their intentions through action. Otherwise, you're simply entering the same loop, hoping this time the story will end differently. And yet, people often ignore the warning signs. They focus on how the message made them feel, rather than what the silence truly revealed. They say, maybe he's ready now. Maybe this is a second chance. But a second chance is only meaningful when it comes with growth. And growth doesn't happen in isolation. It happens through reflection, humility, and a willingness to do things differently. If someone cannot articulate what they learned from the distance, if they cannot own their behavior without deflecting or minimizing it, then you're not receiving a changed man, you're receiving a familiar pattern dressed in new words. Consistency means showing up when it's not convenient. It means offering presence even when life gets busy. It means staying emotionally available even when things get uncomfortable. When someone re-enters your life, ask yourself, are they consistent now in ways they weren't before? Are they making space for you in their world? Are they investing time, effort, and emotional energy without being asked or reminded? Or are they simply dipping back into your life because the silence got too loud for them? You must understand that people often reach out not because they've transformed, but because they're temporarily triggered by nostalgia, boredom, or loneliness. They might feel genuine emotion in the moment, but emotion is fleeting. What lasts is intention, and intention can only be proven through patterns, so look beyond the words. Watch for alignment between what they say and what they do. If someone says they care but disappear again after a few days, they don't care. They're confused. If someone says they want to rebuild trust but won't answer the hard questions or show up when it matters, they're not rebuilding. They're avoiding. And you have to be strong enough to wait. Not wait for them to prove themselves, but wait before you emotionally reinvest. Let time reveal the truth. Let consistency be the standard. You are not desperate for connection. You are worthy of certainty. You deserve a love that doesn't need to leave and return to appreciate your value. You deserve someone who doesn't make you doubt where you stand. So don't lower your standards because of familiar feelings. Don't hand out access just because someone decided to reach out. Protect your energy the same way you protect your peace, by making sure that only those who match their words with action are allowed to stay. There is wisdom in restraint. There is power in observation. And there is healing in holding yourself to a higher standard, even when your emotions beg you to run back to what's familiar. You've already survived the silence. Don't let the return shake the strength you built in it. Let their actions speak. Let time reveal what words cannot. Let patterns be the proof. There's a silent ache that often follows abandonment, an invisible wound that forms when someone you cared about vanishes without explanation. When he disappears and leaves you hanging in confusion, you don't just deal with the loss of his presence, you deal with the self. Doubt it births. It's not just why did he leave? It becomes, was I not enough? Did I do something wrong? Am I unlovable? And the moment he reaches out again after a stretch of silence, that wound is stirred. Not because he returns with healing, but because his return reopens the questions you never got closure for. That's why it's essential to confront the emotional residue left behind by the silence. Because if you don't process that pain, it will distort your sense of worth. When someone walks away without clarity, it triggers old stories. These stories might not even originate from this relationship. They might be echoes from your childhood, from old betrayals, from times when you felt invisible or dismissed. So when the silence hits, it's not just about what he did, it's about everything it reminds you of. You're not just reacting to him, you're reacting to a lifetime of feeling unheard, unwanted, or unimportant. And when he comes back, those stories don't just disappear. They wait silently in the background, influencing your response, shaping your inner dialogue, dictating your boundaries or lack thereof. If you don't process the pain of being ignored or ghosted, you will find yourself overcompensating when he returns. You'll give more than you should. You'll tolerate more than you deserve. You'll bend your truth to fit his convenience. Not because you're weak, but because you're trying to prove that you're worthy of being chosen this time. You're trying to earn the love you were denied, but here's the truth. Real love doesn't have to be earned through suffering. You don't have to perform emotional gymnastics to prove your value. The moment someone makes you feel like you have to work for their attention is the moment you must question whether their presence is a gift or a test. You cannot afford to bypass your emotional healing just to keep someone in your life. You can't pretend that the silence didn't hurt. You can't bury the confusion under forced optimism. You must allow yourself to feel the disappointment, feel the betrayal, feel the loneliness, because healing begins with honesty. You don't need to pretend you're unaffected. That's not strength, that's suppression, and what you suppress you empower. What you refuse to confront will continue to control you. It's okay to admit that the silence made you question your worth. It's okay to acknowledge that you stayed up wondering what you did wrong. These feelings are valid, but they are not facts. Your worth is not defined by who stayed or who left. Your value is not determined by who failed to see it. But unless you face the emotions the silence brought, you'll carry them into every interaction. You'll second, guess yourself even when you should trust your instincts. You'll lower your standards for fear of being alone again. You'll accept breadcrumbs because you're still starving for the closure that never came. You have to process that pain before you engage again. Don't answer texts out of emotional hunger. Don't rekindle connections out of unresolved grief. Sit with the discomfort. Let it teach you something. Let it reveal the parts of you that still seek validation from external sources. Healing isn't about pretending to be okay, it's about choosing to confront what broke you, and then deciding you no longer want to be broken by it. And sometimes that means not responding. Sometimes that means saying, I'm still healing from the damage you caused. And sometimes it means giving yourself permission to walk away even when your heart wants to stay. Because when you heal, you no longer crave what hurt you. You no longer chase inconsistency. You no longer tolerate emotional manipulation disguised as affection. You begin to see clearly. You begin to realize that love is not supposed to feel like confusion, silence, or guessing games. Love shows up. Love communicates. Love does not disappear and reappear like a passing storm. But you can't arrive at that clarity until you process the emotional weight, the silence left behind. The pain doesn't disappear on its own. Time doesn't heal what you refuse to face. And a message after weeks or months of nothing doesn't erase the damage. In fact, if you haven't processed the pain, the message may feel like hope when in truth, it's a test of your growth. Will you respond from your healed self or from your wounded self? That's the difference between repeating the cycle and rising above it. When you're still carrying unprocessed pain, you'll always see his return as a second chance. But when you've healed, you'll see it as a reflection of the standard you now uphold, one that no longer accepts silence as a form of communication. When he finally reaches out after a long period of silence, something stirs inside you. It's not always excitement. Sometimes it's anxiety. Sometimes it's confusion. Sometimes it's that mix of hope and hesitation that makes your chest tighten. And while your heart might want to reply instantly, your soul knows this is a moment that demands caution. The reason you need to protect your peace before anything else is because silence isn't neutral. It carries weight. And when someone goes silent, they leave you to carry the burden of the unknown alone. That creates emotional tension, so when he reappears, it's not a clean slate. It's a re-entry into a space that's already wounded. That's why peace has to become your highest priority, not the relationship. Not the connection, not even the desire for closure. Peace. Peace is what holds you together when everything around you is uncertain. It's what keeps you grounded when someone's inconsistency tries to destabilize your emotions. You cannot allow anyone, no matter how familiar, to disturb the equilibrium you worked so hard to establish in their absence. Because here's what most people overlook. Silence teaches you how to stand alone. Silence teaches you how to regulate your own emotions, to find comfort within, to detach from the chaos. And that kind of self-reliance doesn't come easily. It comes through nights of confusion, questions without answers, and healing without apology. So when someone shows up again, you have to ask, is this presence protecting my peace or threatening it? You need to evaluate how you feel after the message, not just in the moment of receiving it. Do you feel calm? Do you feel empowered? Or do you feel anxious, restless, or uncertain again? Because real connection, healthy connection, shouldn't make you feel like you're losing yourself. It should bring clarity, not confusion. But if his return triggers emotional turbulence, then your peace is being put at risk. And that's not love, that's instability. You must become fiercely protective of the energy it took to restore yourself during his absence. You cannot let a few sweet words undo weeks or months of internal rebuilding. Peace isn't just the absence of conflict. It's the presence of alignment. It's knowing that you're not compromising your dignity just to maintain communication. It's the ability to say, "This doesn't feel right," and to walk away even if the heart still feels attached. That kind of strength doesn't come from logic. It comes from honoring your emotional boundaries. Because if someone can go silent once, they can do it again. And the only thing that changes the outcome is how much you value your peace over your desire to reconnect. Don't let emotional loneliness drive you back into chaos. Just because someone remembers your name doesn't mean they deserve your time. Just because they missed you in your absence doesn't mean they respect you enough to stay consistent in your presence. That's why you need to hold your peace as the filter through which every interaction passes. If someone disrupts it, they don't belong. If someone brings chaos instead of calm, distance instead of stability, confusion instead of clarity, they haven't earned access to your inner world again. This isn't about punishing them for going silent. This is about protecting the healing that came from the silence. When you guard your peace, you give yourself space to observe clearly. You don't get swept up in emotional highs or fantasy reunions. You can look at their behavior objectively. You can measure their presence over time, rather than reacting to a moment of connection, and that patience reveals everything. If they're genuine, their actions will reinforce that over days, weeks, and even months. But if they're simply here for comfort or attention, the inconsistency will show again. And this time, you won't be caught off guard because you prioritized peace over potential. You must also realize that peace is a form of self-respect. It's saying, "I'm not going to disrupt my mental and emotional wellness for someone who hasn't proven they've changed." And that takes discipline. It's easy to go back to what's familiar. It's easy to entertain the message, the call, the "I miss you." But real peace is knowing that not everything that returns is meant to stay. Some things come back to see if you're still available to be drained, and the version of you who is healed, grounded, and at peace, she knows the difference between love and emotional dependency. Sometimes, choosing peace means saying nothing at all. It means resisting the urge to explain, to clarify, or to revisit. It means letting their message go unanswered, not out of spite, but out of wisdom. Because not every conversation deserves your energy, not every return deserves your attention, and not every man who vanished deserves a second chance to disrupt the serenity you fought to find. The deeper your peace, the clearer your vision. The clearer your vision, the stronger your decisions, and strong decisions are what protect you from falling into the same emotional loops. In the end, your peace is not negotiable. It's the very foundation that determines whether you repeat old patterns or rise into new standards. When he reaches out after silence, you don't owe him access. You owe yourself stability. Let your peace speak louder than your impulse. Let it be the wall that guards your heart, the compass that guides your choices, and the standard by which you measure every return. Because the woman who protects her peace is the woman who never has to beg for love, chase after closure, or settle for temporary affection wrapped in charming apologies. Silence changes things. When someone disappears without explanation, without warning, without the decency of a goodbye or even a reason, it creates more than just distance. It creates doubt. It leaves questions echoing in your mind like unfinished sentences. You begin to wonder what you did wrong. You begin to replay every interaction, every conversation, every moment, hoping to find clues in between the lines. That's the dangerous part about emotional silence. It forces you into a state of internal self-blame. And the problem isn't just that he left. The real damage happens when you start to feel like you weren't enough for him to stay. But let's be honest about what that really is. That's not a reflection of your worth. That's a distortion of it. Silence from someone else is not an indicator of your value. Their inability to communicate has nothing to do with your ability to love, grow, give, or be present. Yet that's how it feels. Like you were dismissed, like you were replaceable, like you didn't matter enough for an explanation. And if you don't recognize how false that narrative is, you'll start to carry that wound into your identity. That's why you need to go back and reclaim your sense of worth, because you are not the one who disappeared. You are not the one who went silent. You are not the one who lacked the courage to speak truth. He was. The return of someone who once abandoned you emotionally can feel validating at first. It can feel like closure. It can feel like proof that you were right, that you weren't imagining things, that he really did care. But the truth is, not all returns are rooted in respect. Sometimes they're just driven by convenience. Sometimes people come back not because they value you, but because they lost something they thought was easily replaceable. When he reaches out again, you have to remember this. His message doesn't erase the silence. His reappearance doesn't undo the absence. You're still the one who stayed in the emotional storm, trying to heal wounds you didn't cause. That's why responding from a place of strength is so crucial. You can't respond with desperation. You can't respond with longing. You can't respond with the version of yourself who still believes their love is something you need to earn. No, you respond with the version of yourself that knows you were never the problem. You respond from power, not pain, from clarity, not confusion. You've grown in his absence. You've learned how to show up for yourself when he couldn't. You've learned how to validate your own emotions, how to navigate loneliness, how to feel everything fully without letting it break you. That kind of transformation cannot be undone by a simple, "Hey, how have you been?" You must also remember that not every message deserves a reply. Just because someone finally found the courage to reach out doesn't mean they deserve immediate access. This is your life. This is your healing. This is your energy. You decide what gets your attention now. Because when you finally step into your strength, you begin to see that not all attention is affection. Not all apologies are sincere, and not all returns are worthy of your time. Sometimes a person's silence was the clearest answer you'll ever get. Their absence was the truth, and now that they're back, you don't have to investigate whether they've changed. You can simply decide that you have. Growth looks like this. You no longer explain yourself to people who left without warning. You no longer entertain conversations that cost you your peace. You no longer shrink yourself to keep someone else comfortable. You stop romanticizing the return of someone who didn't respect you enough to stay consistent in the first place. Because now you know what you bring to the table. You know your love is rare. You know your presence is a gift. And if someone failed to recognize that before, they will not be given the opportunity to misuse it again. People will try to return to the version of you that was still unsure of herself. The version that was waiting for the message. The version that blamed herself. But that version no longer exists. She evolved in silence. She transformed in solitude. She discovered strength in stillness, and when he reaches out, she doesn't rush to respond. She doesn't abandon her peace. She doesn't throw open the door out of emotional hunger. She observes, she listens, she trusts her body, she honors the red flags she once ignored. She no longer just hears words. She watches for consistency, respect, and real effort. Healing teaches you that not every ending needs to be reopened. That not every voice deserves to be welcomed back. And most importantly, that sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. Not out of spite, but out of alignment. Because when you value your healing, you stop craving what hurt you. You stop chasing the ones who left you empty. And you stop placing your worth in the hands of someone who couldn't even hold a conversation when it mattered most. You've become someone new now. Someone who knows what peace feels like. Someone who refuses to lose herself again for the sake of someone else's comfort. And that version of you, she doesn't beg, she doesn't chase, she doesn't prove. She simply exists in her power, and the ones who are meant to stay will never make her question her value.